Why hello there, welcome back and welcome to part 22 of my build log of the Trumpeter 1:200 scale model of the Titanic. Just a quick video today. I'm just going to show the start of my work on the Superstructure. So I've only just started getting B-deck and the actual sides of the Superstructure in place, and I did run into a few problems with that which I'll cover today. I've also put up a shelf, so the model now has a sort of nice decorative shelf in my living room, and I've also made a carrying case for the model when I take it to the lake, so I'll include all of that too. So without any further ado, I'll crack on. So the first thing I'm going to show is my building of the carrying case. This is something I sort of thought I probably needed the last time I went to the lake, and it's because the model's now at a point where it really is, in some areas, quite delicate. It's not so delicate in other areas, but particularly on the superstructure and things like that, it really is quite easy to damage, and even if you're just a little bit unlucky, things can get damaged. So with that in mind, I decided to make a carrying case out of some 6mm marine plywood, which I had lying around. And it's nothing fancy, it is just a very simple wooden box. I've used some of the packaging that the kit came in, and this is really helpful actually because it's foam which is almost cut to the shape of the hull, so it produces a really nice sort of mating surface for the hull to be held up against, and the case just gives the boat that little bit more resilience. When you carry it to and from the lake, it just gives you that little bit more resilience from bumps and bangs and knocks and stuff, you know. Also, my sincere apologies for the truly shocking hair. I haven't had it cut since the start of the whole COVID lockdown-y stuff, so it's somewhat out of control at the moment. Told you the hair was bad. Anyway, that's the finished case in the shed with a coat of yacht varnish on it, just drying. And I'll show how I intend to use it in the next episode when I take the boat to the lake. Right, so you join me as I try to glue the scale decks for B deck. So I'm only going to do two here. I'm going to do the two private promenades. Before I go any further, I'm just going to check that I've trimmed them down as well as I could have done. Okay, so now I'll test fit these as well. So these are the proper posh cabins. And yeah, they fit very well indeed. So, unlike the other decks, I'm actually going to use pure glue on these. I'm not going to water it down at all. And the reason for that is because I'll never again have access to these decks once they're glued in place. I'll just never ever have access to them. So, to make sure, or to make as sure as possible that the glue never really lets go, I'm going to use a pure glue instead. So it's the same type of glue, it's still Gorilla Wood glue, but I'm going to use undiluted. And as before, I know some people disagree, I quite like using my fingers just because I feel like you get a bit more control over where you're spreading the stuff. Paying particular attention to the corners of the edges, because these are the places that always end up letting go first, you know? A little bit too much. Okay. Right. So, wipe my finger a bit. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use terminal driver, take off some of the excess. Now, normally I would be a bit more concerned about overuse of glue, but because these areas aren't very easy to see in the first place, you know, they're hidden behind a wall and you can only see them through windows, I'm less concerned about decks looking absolutely perfect, and I'm more concerned about them lifting up over time, because that for me is the major issue. If they lift up over time, there's not much I can do about it. So now we put them down. I'm just going to use, I tend to have a selection of bits and bobs. Here I'm just using an Allen key because it just happens to have a nice point on it, but I tend to have a selection of bits of stuff lying around which I can use to sort of make sure the decks are in place properly. can see, what I've done already is I've painted the areas that need to be white, and I've covered the rest of it black. Before we go any further, I'm just going to test fit, see if this actually all does go as it should. So another thing that I've managed to do is to pop a shelf up in the living room to display the model on. This is just a nice slab of live edge timber which I got from a local company. So I took it back, dressed it up and attached it to the wall. Used some pretty heavy duty cast iron brackets for this, as it is going to have to bear quite a lot of weight, especially when the glass case is on top of it. And as some of you know, I work in the railway industry, and so I was very happy to get a railway theme into this shelf. So I've got some Great North Eastern Railway brackets on the walls. So it's really nice, it adds a bit of a centrepiece to the living room, and I think it's a really nice way to display the model. I have now attached the sides of the superstructure onto B-deck, and I did record this, but the video is just rubbish really because you can't see anything, my hands are in the way all the time. So I'm not going to bother showing it, but just for reference, I used a combination, mainly CA glue, but I did also use a bit of plastic glue as well. So I'm now at a point where I've got my superstructure, and I'm at a point where I'm actually able to remove it from the rest of the ship. As you can see, you lift up from the back first, slide out, and up it comes, and there you go, superstructure's removable. I'm shaking it around now. And similarly, when you come to pop it back down, get it in first, slide it forwards, and then lower the aft section. And it sometimes takes a little bit of just sort of manipulating to get it to seat itself properly. You know, here for example, just a little bit of manipulation to get it to sit properly. But once it's in pretty securely, and I'm actually very happy with how it connects. But I had a bit of an issue with this because what I did was, when I add something sizable to the model, for example, I did the same thing with the forecastle deck and the forward well deck. I tend to run the model for a bit just to check that the new addition hasn't caused any major issues, you know. And when I first added the superstructure, I was getting a hell of a lot of vibration, and it was very difficult to work out quite why. But what was happening is that the superstructure was butting up against the sea deck bulkhead, which, as I explained in the last episode, is connected to the rest of the ship. And because this is quite thin, it was acting like a bit of a soundboard. The superstructure was vibrating off it, and it was acting like a bit of a soundboard and amplifying the sound. So although the vibrations were no more severe than they had been before the superstructure was added, there was a fairly thin piece of plastic that was able to sort of vibrate and magnify those sounds more, which obviously was a bit of an issue. So what I've had to do, and it's a bit of a novel solution, but it has worked, is initially, I'm going to move the camera now, initially the bottom part of B deck here was plastic, just like the rest of the B deck. Now what I've done is I've actually removed that piece of plastic. It's very similar to the back. You see the back piece is just a plastic sort of lintel that butts up against the bulkhead. And it was the same on the front, but I've since removed this piece and instead I've added rubber. This is the same type of rubber that I've used on the resilient mounts on the motors and for holding the decks and stuff down. And what this does is this rubber is now butting up against the sea deck bulkhead. And of course rubber is quite good at nullifying vibration. It's not perfect by any means, but what it does is when you push the rubber up against here, the rubber's able to sort of slightly alter its shape as the vibrations come in. And what that does is it just stops the noise being produced. So instead of having a sort of really quite noisy vibration, the boat is now really quite silent when the superstructure is in place. And I can demonstrate that for you now. If I turn on the ship, here we are. My apologies, I'm trying to say ship instead of boat, but I've got into a bad habit. That's very upsetting. But now if I run the ship, the only noise is the propeller noise. There's no vibration coming from here. So it's quite a good example, I guess, of a sort of unforeseen problem rearing its head and then having to find a solution to it that fits in with the rest of the model. So quite a nice little challenge there. So I'm not done on B deck by any means, but I just thought before I went any further I'd check that A deck fitted nicely, and in reality it does. You can see all of A deck right along manages to fit pretty snugly. There might be a bit of an overshoot here, but I think quite a lot of people have had that on their model. But the thing I was most worried about was making sure that the actual sides of the superstructure mated up nicely against this deck, and I'm delighted to say that they do. So with that in mind, I'm pretty happy now to go on to the sort of more arty-farty bits of stuff on the B deck, things like the interiors, Cafe Parisian, lighting, yada yada yada. So that's it for today. I will leave it there, I think. I've made quite good progress, I think, and I'm glad that I got the superstructure in and it's now able to be detached quite easily, you know. I've been doing quite a lot of work since filming this video on the interiors for B-Deck, things like the private promenades, Cafe Parisien, etc. So the focus of the next video will be my work on that. But until then, if you've got any questions or comments, what have you, whack them down below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. I do now have an Instagram page for this model, so if you want to see still photos and stuff of my interior work before I actually get around to making the video, you can check that out if you fancy. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.